get into hypotheticals about the extending a lease or not, but I will say this. There's no definite timeline. I can tell you that failure's not an option. We're going to get a new stadium here. It's just a question of when. And we're going to make it happen. I think we put the people in place to get it done. I can tell you we are aggressively pursuing all options, and we have to make it work. We don't have a choice.
All right, welcome into another episode of Coyotes Corner alongside Dave Vest. I'm Luke Lapinski. You heard the voice of new Coyotes sole owner, Andy Barraway. Not a new owner, but now it's 100% his team. That was his quote there from the press conference last week when new CEO Steve Patterson, new head coach Rick Tocchet were introduced. Of course, Andrew Barraway was up there on stage as well alongside Aaron Cohen and John Chaika. And Dave, was pretty
memorable,
pretty packed press conference there in the middle of July. We joke on the show a lot that it feels like there is no offseason in the NHL anymore. That has really been the case for the Coyotes this particular offseason.
Were you there? I didn't see you.
Yeah, I was standing directly in front of you, Dave, so nice of you to notice. I literally was like 4 feet in front of you.
Quite a memorable day for the Coyotes franchise. As you said, the press conference was packed. I mean, we've done quite a few of these press conferences, and I don't remember that many members of the media showing up. All sorts of questions. We're going to go over some of them and some of the answers, but I was really impressed by the turnout at the press conference, and lasted about 40 minutes or so, and so much good information came out of it, and such a good vibe, I felt, about the Coyotes and what the future holds.
Yeah, there was a lot, and it was our first time to get to hear from Rick Tocchet as the head coach of the team, the first time to get to hear from Steve Patterson as the CEO of the Coyotes, and also our first time to get to hear from Andy Barraway as the sole owner in terms of publicly fielding questions and whatnot, and that was really the money quote from the whole thing. There was a lot of different topics that were discussed. There was a lot of different directions the questioning and even just the initial statements went. And there was a lot, quite frankly, to be discussed. I mean, you're bringing in a new head coach, a new CEO. You've got all sorts of stuff going on in terms of an arena, and that's what that quote, of course, was about from Andy Barraway. So that was the one that everybody kind of ran with because it's a really strong, quick soundbite. And so I feel like he knew what he was doing when he said that, and a lot of people ran with it. That was cool, but it was also really, you mentioned that there's a big crowd. You kind of get used to whatever sport you're covering, seeing the same reporters and media members. There's a pretty similar group you're drawing from that cover hockey or cover football or whatever. There was pretty much everybody here for that one.
I like the quote and the explanation from Andy Barraway about why he wanted to be the sole owner. He was part of a group of owners that were in charge of this team for a couple of years, as many as 10 at one point. And, Andy was asked flat out why take sole ownership of this team, and his explanation was quite simple in that, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was too many cooks in the kitchen, and good luck trying to get 10 people to agree on one thing when you're talking about anything.
Yeah,
really. You and I are arguing over whether or not this is our 50th podcast or not.
We'd be the worst co-owners ever. But I mean, think about it. Get 9 of your friends together in a room and then try and decide where you're going to go eat that night.
Well, I don't have 9 friends, but thank you for
Well, I was talking to
that.
the listeners, not you. Get 9 of the listeners in one room with you and try and decide where you're going to eat that night. I used this analogy the other day. If you're playing fantasy football and you're co-running a team with 2 other people, you're never really going to take any chances because what are the odds all 3 of you are going to agree on taking a chance? You're always going to kind of, just by having that many voices, you're always going to kind of sort of regress to the mean and just do the most simple, least risky thing possible. So I can only imagine what it's like having 10 owners of an actual professional sports franchise. It's just, it's different, and it worked, but I like that answer as well. It was very basic of, look, try and get 10 people to agree on anything. Now try and get them to agree on making major decisions about a business.
So yeah, a very important press conference for the Coyotes, to say the least. We're kind of just scratching the surface here, Luke, but if we look at our agenda for this podcast, I think we've gotten to the point where we want to talk about hiring Rick Tocchet as the head coach of the team. He becomes the 18th head coach in the history of the franchise. Of course, that started in Winnipeg, And Rick comes aboard after a very, very successful run. Notice I said very twice.
Yeah.
It's for each Stanley Cup he won.
I see what you did that.
With the Pittsburgh Penguins as an assistant coach. Yeah. So let's talk about Rick a little bit. I know you love the hire because, aside from covering the Coyotes as your job, you're a hockey fan and you grew up a Penguins fan. And Rick Tocchet helped your Penguins quite a bit.
Well, there's a few ways to look at this. And I understand anytime you hire a coach you're not hiring Joe Quenneville. You're not hiring Mike Sullivan, who just won the 2 cups. You're not hiring an established head coach that's won cup after cup after cup. So I understand that there's always going to be some questions until he takes over. But I like it for a lot of different reasons, honestly. First of all, you're getting the assistant coach that just won the last 2 Stanley Cups. That in a lot of ways, very close with Mike Sullivan. They both worked together in Tampa as well. So he learned a lot from him. He wasn't just some distant guy that was kind of involved with the team down the bench, or somewhere in the organization like you or I. It's somebody that was right there. I mean, it was Mike Sullivan's right-hand man for the last 2 Stanley Cups, playing a style of hockey that the Coyotes ultimately want to play. And this is how you get good coaches in the NHL now. They have a run as a head coach somewhere for about a year, 2 years or whatever, and then they kind of go back. This is what Mike Sullivan did. And then you kind of go back, you either work your way through the AHL or you're an assistant somewhere. And in Rick Tocchet's case, he had a lot of success as an assistant, and he's at the point in his career where he has the nice mix of he's accomplished a lot already, but he still has something to prove. And that's like the sweet spot when you're hiring somebody.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you said that. Some of the comments that Rick made at the press conference really struck me as terrific comments. He talked a lot about how he wants the players to play with freedom. He knows that a lot of the young players on this team have skill, and he wants them to try and display that skill.
Yeah.
And he's giving them the green light to do that within reason. He made several references to he's not looking for a 10-9 game or all sorts of odd man rushes on both ends. There will be a system in place, but he's not going to take the stick out of their hands. I thought that was a great comment. He also talked about how it's the players' room. He's the coach, but it's their room. And
he seems like he's going to be a player's coach.
Yeah. He wants them to be accountable for what happens on the ice. He's there to help, and he's there to, get them back on track should they stray off, but it's really all about them.
I think it's important to note, too, obviously the Coyotes have a very young team, and I think people look at Rick Tocchet and they'll say, well, it's great that he can have success with star players, and that's not always easy to do. Star players related to him very well in Pittsburgh, and so that's great. That is absolutely a positive. But I think when people look at Pittsburgh, they see Crosby and they see Malkin and they see Phil Kessel. There's a lot of rookies and second-year players in these last 2 cup runs that played huge roles. And obviously Jake Gensel's maybe the most recognizable from this past year because he set like every American rookie scoring record or whatever. But Brian Rust, Connor Sheary, last year, Tom Kuhnhackl, they had a bunch of young players. Matt Murray, but that's a goalie, so it's a little bit separate. Rick Tocchet was a major part of that, and getting the young players not only to relate to him, but to be able to transition seamlessly into the NHL. And that's, to me, that's his most pressing task here, and I think that's a major reason why they hired him.
And he seems very excited to work with young players. I know at the press conference he told us all a story about how, he was just kind of walking the halls here at the arena, and he just happened to bump into Brendan Perlini.
I love this story.
Who was in the locker room messing with his sticks. And
in the middle of July.
Right.
And there's not ice in this arena, in case you haven't been here, you're just listening to us. There's no ice in here right now.
So Brendan was in there checking on his sticks and doing whatnot, and he happened to bump into his new coach. And Rick Tocchet mentioned that to all of us as a sign of the enthusiasm of these young players. And I think that's going to be a big part of the success success or failure of what the Coyotes are looking to accomplish this season is enthusiasm from the young players and enthusiasm from the coach to let them be young players.
I think another thing that really stood out too, John Chaika said this at the press conference, and he said it in a few other platforms now as well, but he asked a lot of people about Rick Tocchet, whether they are, guys like Mario Lemieux, who obviously knows something about hockey, or people that played with Rick Tocchet, or people that played for Rick Tocchet, and pretty much unanimously people were like, yeah, you want this guy as your coach. And if you read the newspapers or the websites from Pittsburgh, they didn't want to lose him.
Right. The hashtag I think John made a joke about was, he's the best coach I ever had. all these players that they contacted regarding Rick Tocchet. That seemed to be the common theme or common phrase from everyone that John talked to. So, you know, you throw that out there, and I think a comment like that coming from John, that just speaks volumes about the type of coach that Rick is.
Yeah, and I mean, and John also said that it was without disrespecting the other people they interviewed, this was pretty clear cut their choice. They weren't wavering on this. There was no sort of indecision going back and forth. This was their guy.
None whatsoever. And John made it known that about 25 coaches reached out to him inquiring about the position. And I think he said they interviewed 4 or 5.
Yeah.
But even among those 4 or 5, Rick and his 5-hour presentation during his interview just kind of stood out and had John and some of the other people in the room wanting to, you know, run through the wall for Rick, as they say.
It's you could see even in the press conference, and you talked to Rick Tocchet. We're going to hear that in just a moment. I talked to him on a different platform last week as well. You can hear the excitement in his voice, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is his NHL team now. He gets to step in. This is his group. You know, it's one thing to win Stanley Cups as an assistant coach, and when I talked to him last week, he said this. You know, it's like, I had a really, really comfortable job in Pittsburgh. They've won 2 in a row. They're going to be in contention to win 3 in a row. I mean, they've lost some pieces, but either way, he absolutely could have stayed there in a real nice spot as an assistant with one of his really good friends as the head coach and contended for a cup again this year and next year and whatever. But the chance to really have your own team and a team with a lot of young talent, which I know we've talked about for 2 years now on this podcast, but the fact that somebody across the country coming off a team that just won 2 Stanley Cups recognizes that young talent, that says a lot about that young talent. It's not just we're talking about the local team, so we know about these 2 or 3 guys. It's 9 or 10 guys, and it was enough to draw a guy away from a team that's had a lot of success.
Okay, so Rick Tocchet as a NHL player, Luke, he played 1,144 games. He spent 3 seasons here with the Phoenix Coyotes, scored 440 goals, 512 assists. Then after that, he was an assistant coach with Colorado, with the Coyotes, of course, for 1 season. Moved on to Tampa Bay, where he started as an assistant but ended up being the head coach there for 148 games. Then, as we've noted, he went on to the Pittsburgh Penguins for 3 seasons. Shortly after the press conference, I had a chance to talk to Rick one-on-one, and here are some of the things he had to say. Rick, first of all, just welcome back to Arizona. Tell us, if you would, how easy or difficult was this decision for you to leave Pittsburgh after 2 Stanley Cups to come back to Arizona?
Well, it was twofold, because obviously leaving Pittsburgh, it was sad. You know, I mean, I have a lot of great relationships there. It was a hell of a run we had there. For me, I loved my time there. The exciting part is I get to come to an area that I probably was going to live when I retired. I love the area. I used to play here. I saw the fan base, the way they supported us back then. So I see that vision. And then obviously talking to Andrew and John and asking them, as much as they were asking me questions, I asked them a lot of questions about the stability and where are we going with this thing. And it was all commitment, positive energy, excitement. Those were the kind of the words they said to me. And then we went through a process for 2 weeks, and they offered me a 4-year deal, which I think is a commitment, and I think this is a great job to have. And I'm excited about it.
Rick, if you would, please tell us about your style as a head coach and what our fans can expect to see from this team starting in October.
Well, I want to bring a real positive. When you have young kids, you got to be very positive. I'm going to bring accountability. I mean, that's something that I will tell the kids that we're going to have accountability. They have to have a belief when they come to the rink, they have a chance to win. Once they hit that door, they have a chance to win. When they get in their car ride home, they have a chance to win the next night. That's the attitude we have to have. And we're gonna, every time you come to Rick, we're going to try to get better. Whether it's through video, practice, the way we eat, the way we train, the way we travel, all that sort of stuff is kind of a byproduct of winning. And I think that's something I'm going to share my knowledge with the young kids. And we have a couple older veteran guys that have won before too. They're going to help me too. They'll be an extension of our coaching staff, the Sean Wilsons and Stefan. So that'll really help me too.
Rick, when you look at this roster on paper, what excites you about it, and what are your goals for this first season?
My goal is to make everybody play better. As a coach, that's your main focus. If I can have everybody play better than they did last year, that's a win-win. Obviously, I want this team to own their room. It's their room, not my room. I'm not the show. They're the show. I'm going to help them. So that's my goal. Wins and losses, I can't give it a win-loss. I don't know. But the other things I think we can win are those things. Can I make a guy a better leader? Can I make a guy more accountable? Can I make a guy a self-starter where, he'll go up and practice early on himself. I don't have to push him. And I will push guys. I mean, I know talking to some players, they want to be pushed. And hopefully I push the right buttons and it's a partnership. Nowadays, as a coach and a player, there's a partnership for the main goal to win a Stanley Cup.
Are you okay with the balance of players on this roster? And by that I mean veterans to rookies and younger players?
Well, there's not always a perfect, situation. I don't care. In Pittsburgh, you're always trying to find balance. But I think there's some, John always talked about, we're not done. He's going to try to make some other type of moves. But in the meantime, my job, whoever I have right now, I'm going to coach them as hard as I can. And that's kind of, eventually, hopefully you find the balance that you want. But right now, it's a matter of just, coaching guys who you have and getting a training camp ready and getting guys excited.
Okay, so the season begins, believe it or not, 12 weeks from today.
Yeah.
Does that feel like 12 years from now or 12 hours?
Well, I just finished like 2-3 weeks ago, so I don't mind the 12 weeks. I don't want to rush too much. But, no, it's, I shared the story about Brendan Perlini was in the dressing room today.
Yeah.
It's July. So, but that's the excitement I want.
Yeah.
That's the excitement I want. There's plenty of time. There's a lot of work to be done, but there's plenty of time.
That's what I was getting at. Do you feel like there's enough time here, and will this team be ready to roll?
Yeah, my big goal, obviously, I get a couple of assistant coaches. That's number one.
Right.
I'll get a systems taped together. If guys want to watch it before training camp, so they know the style of play, I think that will help. I got to make phone calls to some players. I got to get to know them. Hopefully, I see some guys around the valley in the next month. I might travel somewhere to meet a couple other guys. I think that's important. I think the one-on-one stuff here in the next 2-3 months is really big. That people will get to know me, and I'll get to know the players. So I think that's a big thing that I gotta do. Because I love communicating. I want to make sure that they're not afraid to communicate with me.
Last question for you. I'm just curious. Now that you're a head coach, or you've been an NHL head coach, but taking it on again, has there been a coach in your past, either as a player or as an assistant, that you've learned a lot from and will bring with you into this role? Can you tell us any stories?
Well, that's a great question. I was lucky enough to play for the great Scotty Bowman. Mm-hmm. I loved his bench management. I played for Jim Schoenfeld. I love Jim Schoenfeld's communication with the players. He was a really nice guy. Mike Keenan, he was a very intimidating guy. Mike Sullivan, I coached with him for 2.5 years. Hell of a coach. So if I can bottle a little bit of all those guys, man, I got a head start on a lot of people. But my style is, I'm not going to be a yell and screamer. I know people think that I'm going to be walking with a big stick and hitting guys with it. No, I mean, I'm a communicator. Hey, there's going to be the odd time you're going to have to blast a few times, but I'm a communicator. I want to make sure I'm a teacher, communicator, and like my door's always open.
All right, so good stuff there from Rick Tocchet. I like the last point he made, and it was a good question by you, Dave.
Thank you, Lou.
Everybody gets one every once in a while, right? No, I mean, he's been around some of the best minds in hockey, and so to hear him throw out those names right there, when you become a head coach, you're bringing that influence from all the people that you've either coached with or you've been coached by into your new job, and so that's a pretty nice mix if he can bring that collection here to the table for the Coyotes. Okay,
so the other big news at the press conference, or I should say the other introduction.
Yeah.
To the management team, Steve Patterson. He comes back to Arizona. He has ties to the Valley, of course. He was over at Arizona State University in that athletic department not too long ago.
No.
And Steve was introduced as the president and CEO of the Coyotes. I'm curious your thoughts on that based on Steve's history here and also the job at hand. I mean, there were no bones about it. It was basically announced that Steve was hired with number one priority being to help get this team an arena.
Well, if you look at what the Coyotes have done over the last few years and you look at, the rebuild, it depends on your perspective what year of that they're in, but just sort of the sense I got from hearing Andy Barraway talk and what we've sort of heard from John Chaika, they're ready to start turning a corner here and really starting to push for playoff spots and take the next step. That's the attitude of this team. And so you look at what's on the ice, and there's always ways you can improve, certainly, but I feel like John Chaika sort of has that on lockdown right now. When he makes trades, people feel good about him. When he drafts players so far, people feel really good about that as well. The next step for this team off the ice is clearly, now you've got everybody in place, for the most part, is to go out there and get that arena situation solidified. And so it makes a lot of sense to bring in a guy with local ties. If you start to just work down your list of people that have been around the Valley, that have that many ties around this area, with the sort of experience that Steve Patterson has in terms of working on arenas or renovating them or getting new ones, there aren't that many. I mean, he's the list, basically. He's one or two guys. So it makes a lot of sense, very specifically for what they need him to do. And I got to say, this stood out during the press conference as well. Both he and Rick Tocchet both referenced their past ties to Arizona in terms of just how much they've seen it change. Like, I asked Steve Patterson how much he's seen downtown Phoenix change in just the last 5-10 years. It's remarkable how much it's changed. So it is kind of cool to not just have, it's not like Rick Tocchet played here for 20 games and he knows where Phoenix is. Like, these guys, both he and Patterson, have lived here before and gone away, and they come back. They already have that sort of history here.
Yeah, that's a great point, and something that's definitely a big part of the decision. In talking to Andy Barraway, he said absolutely Steve's history here in the Valley and the connections that he's made in the community, in the corporate world, in the political world, all very important to what the Coyotes are trying to do here, and that is, quite frankly, to get an arena built in the East Valley.
Yeah. And this is a unique hockey market. So I think it helps to have, it's a unique sports market, to be honest. So I think it helps to have Steve Patterson have that sort of experience, just knowing what's important to the people here and knowing his way around business deals like this. But also Rick Tocchet, as a former player and as a former assistant, kind of just knows what the hockey community in Arizona is all about. And
one thing to keep in mind that was underlined a few times during the press conference is that there's not going to be all of these updates about the situation with the arena, over time.
Yeah.
I think what you're going to see is not a lot of news and then some significant news, as opposed to what's happened in the past where there'll be something to say in 2 weeks. There'll be something else in 3 weeks. I don't think we're going to see that. I think the next time you hear from Steve Patterson about the arena, it's going to be a very significant comment.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to point out. It was also discussed, too, that there's no, they want to get this done, but there's no hard, urgent timeline. Now, that doesn't mean they're not working on it right now, probably, as you and I sit here and talk about hockey, but people don't need to panic if they haven't heard anything for the next month or whatever. Like you said, it's going to go on behind the scenes, I would assume, with the intention of, let's not get everybody's hopes up until it's done, and also let's not slow down the process by stopping to talk about what we're doing. Let's just do it, and let's just get it done with. One other thing from that press conference before we move on, this was brought up a couple times, both then and then in the days after that, building a new identity for this team, which is... It's compelling to me because I want to see what that identity is. Because Rick Tocchet, you read off his stats and where he's played and coached, he scored goals, but he was also a tough guy out there on the ice.
He was very tough. And you expect that to carry over into his coaching.
Yeah.
But as he said, and as John mentioned, Rick's a real nice guy at the same time. So I think you're going to see a blend of that.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see Rick slide into that mode of enforcer, if you will, as a coach, when needed.
Yeah.
But you're not going to see him, walking up and down the halls, with an angry look on his face.
Just cross-checking reporters.
Right.
None of that.
Or staff members.
Yeah, well, it's a unique situation to be able to sort of build that identity from scratch because you have so many young players that are in their either rookie year coming up or their second year or their third. I guess, do we just keep... I mean, it's a nice power outage here in the middle of the show. Should we take a break?
I literally cannot see you, Luke, and we're sitting about 4 feet apart. This is quite funny. This really happened. The light in my office just went out.
It's just your office. As I look out the door, it's not a power outage. It's just the light in your office. So,
okay.
Dave, take that for what it's worth.
It's not creepy at all.
No, it's not. Fortunately, we have the light of this computer here to talk by. What else is coming up in this summer? There shouldn't be a whole lot left for the Coyotes to do. Obviously, rookie camp will start sometime early September, so we're about a month and a half away from seeing real hockey again, which really isn't that far. But there's still some business to be taken care of. Rick Tocchet he still has to fill out his coaching staff now.
Right. There are 2 slots available. And I expect that to happen quite quickly as we roll into August here. We're at the middle of July now.
Yeah.
The season starts 11 weeks from Thursday.
That's the season. I mean, you got training camp and everything before that. Yeah.
The first game at Anaheim, 11 weeks from Thursday. Today's Tuesday. Let's do some quick math. 11 times 7.
79 days. 77 plus 2, so 79.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I do better math in the dark.
So, is that a lot of time? Is that not a lot of time? I'm going to say it's a lot of time, but there's a lot to be done, and we're going to talk about that in future podcasts. But for right now, I think the priority is for Rick Tocchet to fill out his coaching staff. And as he told me the other day, he wants to get to know the players now, like on a one-on-one basis. So he's got a lot of phone calls to make. He wants to send them a tape of his system so they can watch it and see it and know what he's all about before they even get here. A lot of them are already here, as we've noted before. A lot of the young players have stayed the summer here and are kind of hanging out together, but they're also kind of skating together on their own.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. As you brought up the Brendan Perlini story earlier, I love that story. I love the fact that, as crazy as it probably sounds to all the people they grew up with, a lot of these young players are staying in Phoenix in the summer. And it's cool because you build that sort of camaraderie before you even get to rookie camp, training camp, the season or whatever. And some of these guys are already on the team. They know that. But other guys, as good as Dylan Strome is, he's got work to do in terms of making the team right out of camp. But there's no given, and he knows that. And so I just... It's not like I'd be upset if they weren't doing it, but I like it. It's just a little bonus that they're all hanging out here in the summer working out and practicing at some of the local rinks and everything and just training and getting in shape because... You talk to any player around the league now, certainly any coach that played 10, 20, 30 years ago or whatever, they'll tell you that it's now a year-round sport. In the past, players would come to training camp to train and get in shape, and now you need to be doing that basically a week after your season ends to get ready for training camp down the line.
Okay, I'm going to go off the board here and bring up a topic that we didn't discuss in our quote-unquote rehearsal.
Okay.
On a lighter note, did you happen to see Max Domi's campaign to raise money for diabetes research?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Max, of course, for the better part of last season, grew a beard. And he kept it all summer, and it was quite long. And it was quite, what's
Wizard-like?
the word? Wizard-like, yeah. It was quite Grizzly Adams-like. I don't know if I've lost people there with that reference. Grizzly Adams was a character from the 70s who lived out in the wilderness and kind of tripped over his beard.
It was a powerful beard.
So Max decided that, okay, it's time to shave the beard, and I assume he figured, let's make this an event and try to raise some money for diabetes research. And I have to tell you, he did great.
Yeah.
He wanted to raise $10,000. Over $60,000 was raised, and it's still going.
That's pretty good. That's that's obviously a great cause. Max Domi, I don't know if you watch Max when he posts the videos. It's either on Snapchat or Instagram. But Max and Ty Domi, when either one of them posts a video, it's pretty hilarious. Those two, I've mentioned this before, and I guess they basically do. Those two need a reality show together, and they basically gotten one. And obviously Ty Domi was there when this happened too. Yes.
So if you take nothing away from this story, other than please go to Max's GoFundMe page and donate. Also take away that if you're missing the Coyotes, and we're in the dog days of summer now, July and August, you can always follow Max Domi on social media.
Yeah, pretty much all of the players.
What do you want to talk about? Let's wrap this up.
Well, it's extremely dark in here, and I can't see your whiteboard, but I know we now have the order of trying to figure out who the leadership group officially is going to be for this team. So whether that's going to be Oliver Ekman. Dave just turned on a light in the middle of the show that he had. You have a backup light, and we sat here in the dark for 10 minutes?
I do. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I thought it was going to be a temporary blackout, but it's clearly not.
So when the power goes out, you panic, and your first reaction is not to turn on the other light that you have?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. In terms of captaincy and
sure.
Who's going to wear A's this season?
Sure. Well, we all know
thoughts?
Shane Doan won't be back, so the Coyotes need a new captain. And we've heard, rumblings and rumors about Oliver Ekman-Larsson being the logical choice. So
we've said that on the show for 2 years, basically.
We have, and so we'll go with that assumption. Nothing official yet, but we'll go with it. Alternate captains. If you were in charge of picking alternate captains, who would you pick, Luke? And why?
Well, here, let's do. We'll each pick one. I'll go first. Max Domi.
Okay.
Still very young, obviously. This is a young team, so I don't think you have to worry about, oh, this guy's only 22 years old or whatever. It's a very young team, so I don't think age is necessarily an issue. I think what is important is experience, and Max has it. Obviously, 2 years in the NHL, but he also has experience being a leader for Team Canada and a leader in junior hockey. And actually, the Coyotes have a lot of players that were either captains or alternate captains in junior hockey or whatever. But Max also grew up around the game, and so in a sort of a different way, he almost has experience that he was gaining when he was 8 years old, just being around the rink. And when you talk to Max and you ask him some of the people that have influenced him, he's always going to point out his father, of course, but it's a lot of the guys that his dad hung out with, whether it's Matt Sundin or Mario Lemieux or whoever. So I get that Max has only been in the league for 2 years, but I feel like he's been around the league very, very close for like 15. And he has that leadership quality too. That's just natural. It's just the way he is.
My answer is Nicholas Chalmerson, and my reasoning is 2 words: 3 cups. And if I need to elaborate on that, he's won 3 Stanley Cups.
That's a lot more than 2 words.
So,
yeah, he's won 3 cups. He's been a big part of it too.
I don't know if I need to say more. I mean, obviously he's new to this team and probably doesn't know a whole lot of the players, but I would look long and hard at him, and the way that just having him in that room raises the bar for this team.
That's interesting. So you would probably have, under your scenario, you'd have your captain and the guy one of the guys wearing the A on the same defensive pairing.
I would. Is that crazy?
No, especially not given the circumstances. I mean, Oliver's been groomed for this for, I feel like, the last few years, and he's really sort of embraced it and tried to drink in everything he could from, and certainly learned from Shane Doan as well. But yeah, I mean, to have a guy that's won 3 Stanley Cups and was a huge, maybe underrated, but a huge part of it. Everybody in Chicago knew how important Nicholas Hjalmarsson was. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense, Dave. So that's it. You're giving me the you want to go home sign.
I kind of am. It's getting late.
All right.
We're doing this in the afternoon. We normally do it in the mornings. Am I wrong?
Yeah. When are we going to do another one of these? Tomorrow?
We'll see.
Okay. Probably not tomorrow. But
probably.
Maybe a couple weeks here again.
Soon.
We've been going about every other week this summer so far.
Yeah, so. Congratulations on 50 of these. I've really enjoyed doing them. At least 1 or 2 of them. The other 48.
Look, 2 out of 50, that's not bad, right? Okay, thanks to executive producer Doug Cannon for putting this all together for us. For Dave Vest, I'm Luke Lapinski. Thanks for listening to Coyotes Corner.